Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today we'll be taking a look at the Wisdom Seekers Tarot by David Fontana. The Wisdom Seekers Tarot, at least in the book, takes a Jungian approach to tarot in which the author himself states that tarot cards are best used to aid in general self-development and inner growth rather than as a tool for fortune-telling. Now, this rather dry and psychological approach to the cards is echoed throughout the book, but in my opinion doesn't really resonate with the dreamy storybook images of the cards, but we'll get into that in a moment. This deck was previously released as the Truth Seekers Tarot, which was written by David Fontana and illustrated by Sylvia Dagenhalt. It was published by Duncan Baird in 2008. It is my understanding that the original deck had some gold gilding on the cards, and I believe that the artwork remains the same in this edition as it does the original publication. This new edition, which is rebranded as the Wisdom Seekers Tarot, is published by Watkins and was released in April of 2017. So this deck came in a sturdy slide box with a nice pull ribbon. The cards sit in the cradle, as you can see here, and the book sits on top. So I will probably move this deck to a bag because, as you can probably see, the cradle is starting to tear a bit. So this deck includes the standard 78 cards, which measure about 2 3/4 by 4 3/4 inches, which is a nice standard tarot size. The cardstock in this deck is a bit thick for my taste, and it has a semi-gloss finish which does occasionally catch the light, but it's not really glaring. There is a small white border trimmed in a thin black line, and it has big, easy-to-read titles, although they aren't really centered in the title area. So the border is mirrored on the back here with this textured orange gradient that actually looks a little fuzzy up close. Honestly, the backs are really lacking on this deck, and I feel like the imagery was just thoughtlessly applied. Would have liked to have seen some pattern or detail, or maybe even the nice leaves from the front of the book here, as this deck really is quite plain and boring when it's laid face down in a spread. Thankfully, the printing on the front of the card, which is really what the most important part is anyway, is very lovely. The colors pop nicely, the printing is clear, and the texture within the actual artwork does stand out. The Wisdom Seekers Tarot, according to the book, is an exploration of symbols and archetypes to aid the seeker on their path to self-discovery and personal growth. Fontana writes that the tarot is a visual aid to help us on the journey toward deeper understanding of who we are. The author focuses primarily on the major arcana, which in his opinion is the most important aspect of the deck in terms of inner psychology and spiritual development. This narrow vision of the tarot does hinder the book in the sense that the information about the minors is quite skimpy, making the minors feel rather like an afterthought. He talks about the use of visual symbols and archetypes in the tarot and goes on to provide some brief recommendations about getting started with the deck, which really does read more like a preparatory routine for meditation. This meditative method is further explored in the section on working with the tarot before we get into any of the information about the arcanas and the cards. It really is a good little book if you're interested in the psychology of tarot, and I did find the majority of the information to be informative. However, if you are hoping to use this guidebook for meanings or interpretations, you will probably be disappointed because you will not find a single divinatory message within these pages. This is not a guidebook in the traditional sense by any means, and while that may be of interest to some, it may really inhibit others from being able to effectively read with this deck in a way that resonates with them. Overall, I found it an interesting rather than useful read. The major arcana is really where this deck shines. It's an interesting blend of Rider-Waite-Smith and Marseille. The Fool and the Magician both have a very Marseille feel, with the Jester and the Street Performer performing their roles as card 0 and card 1. Arcana number 2 has a very Papist feel, but bears the title the High Priestess. Here we have the Empress, the Emperor, our Hierophant, and our Lovers take a very traditional, if somewhat whimsical approach to the card. Here we definitely get the feeling of a choice being made. Have the Chariot and Strength coming in at position number 8, which is the Rider-Waite-Smith positioning for this trump. We have the Hermit and the Wheel, and we find Justice in position 11. Here we have the Hanged Man and Death. The Death card is both numbered and named in this deck and features the traditional skeleton. However, he's cloaked, which gives him a softer, less foreboding energy. We have the beautiful Temperance, the traditional Devil, the Tower, the Star, the Moon, a sun card where we do see a nude couple about to embark on their joyous union. I'm thrilled to see this imagery over a naked baby any day. Judgment, and of course, the World. The major arcana is beautifully illustrated, and you can see touches of gold where the gilding might have been on the original version. The majors have a dreamy, storybook-like quality that makes a beautiful representation of the Fool's journey. However, when attempting to use the majors for self-discovery as the book suggests, I found it challenging to connect with these cards in that way. While I love the artwork, the dreamy innocence of the cards prevented me from doing any deep reflective work with this deck. The inconsistencies between the book and the cards becomes glaringly apparent in the minor arcana. Fontana clearly states that he attributes the elemental correspondences of water for the cups, earth for the pentacles, air for the wands, and fire for the swords. However, when we view the actual cards in the minor arcana, the artwork clearly suggests fire for the wands and air for the swords. As this is the association that I work with, the cards work well for me on an elemental level, but I'm left to wonder why there is the discrepancy between the book and the art. The only thing that I really don't care for in the minors is the use of the repeated backgrounds. When I first started working with this deck, I didn't think the repetition would bother me, but it does start to feel a bit redundant when they show up together in a reading, and it can make larger readings very difficult to scan. So you can see that the minors are pip style, which relates to the numerical meanings and the suit associations. The cards are lovely and the colors are rich and beautiful. Although there isn't a full scene pictured, there is some scenic illustration going on within each card. The court cards follow the structure of princesses, princes, queens, and kings. Fontana notes that each suit represents qualities and traits of personalities, but also notes the four complementary forces deemed to make up humanity: kings for spirit, queens for soul, princes for mind, and princesses for body. This is an interesting assignment of the courts, and one that I enjoyed working with while using this deck. The princesses, which are often referred to as pages in other decks, are said to represent the young and beautiful aspects of the female archetype. Fontana also refers to them as elusive and provocative, and associates them with the body, which is why I suppose they are presented as bare-breasted. They are beautiful representations of inner youthfulness. The princes are our traditional knights with their trusty steeds. The princes are the archetypal hero figure, and as the author states, that part of ourselves to which in our innermost idealistic moments we aspire. These strapping lads represent the mind with all of its strengths and weaknesses. Our queens hold a lovely and nurturing space where even the Queen of Swords, who wields her blade confidently, embodies strong feminine energy. These beautiful and powerful queens can be both mother and protector and create a wonderful representation of soul. Here we see our confident kings on horseback. The kings are the archetypal of the paternal father and inspire us to become the wise rulers of ourselves. At their finest, they encapsulate spirit, but they can also represent inner conflicts. The energy of each suit and the movement towards mastery shines through these cards. Now, despite some of the design choices and inconsistencies with the book, the Minor Arcana is a strong representation of a pip suit and reads brilliantly in terms of numerological and suit associations. I know some people have been disappointed by the Minor Arcana in terms of it being a pip deck, but I really enjoyed working with it. The court cards are beautifully illustrated and add a wonderful personable quality to a sometimes challenging group of cards. cards are just small enough to effectively hand over hand shuffle, but they are pretty stiff and difficult to rifle even after repeated use. Breaking them down into smaller stacks for rifling and bridging has worked much better for me. The backs are entirely uninspiring as you work with them, so this is definitely a deck that looks better when laid face up. As I said earlier, I wasn't really able to work with this deck alongside the book. The cards just feel too storybook and airy and to really dive into my own psyche. I needed a more realistic and balanced deck in terms of light and shadow to do that. So I didn't actually use the book with these cards, but I did use it and follow some of the prompts with a different deck. I found it worked quite well, in fact, and have really enjoyed working with this book, just not with these cards. I do, however, really love these cards. They make me happy whenever I look at them. I found them better suited for a little bit lighter readings and not so much for the deep dive into the psychological realm. I actually use them quite a bit for my self-care Sunday spreads and have really enjoyed working with them in that capacity. I find it to be a very nurturing deck, but also very clear, especially if you're comfortable working with a pip deck. The cards are easy to read and tell a beautiful story. I really do think it's a beautiful representation of a pip deck. However, if you are interested in learning to read pips for the first time, I recommend picking up another book or referencing some videos. Kellyanne Maddox and Kelly at the Truth and Story both have some wonderful videos on that, because I don't think you're going to get a balanced enough education with the book that comes with this deck. I think it's a great book to add another layer to your readings and working with the pips. I just don't think it's a very good book for beginners. I do, however, think these cards are pretty good for a beginner. They are very clear and easy to read with. They aren't heavily layered with esoteric meaning or symbolism, so I think they make a good deck for focusing on the core meanings of the pips in terms of number and suit. Now, although there is no diversity in the characters who appear in this deck, the majors and the courts present those iconic figures and images that have become a part of the language of tarot. What really resonated with me the most about this deck was the artwork is beautiful with a storybook quality that is inviting and nurturing. I rather like the fact that it's a pip deck, as I'm always on the hunt for new and interesting styles in that area of tarot. It reads very clear and is very well balanced. A few of the things that I have found a bit irksome about this deck is that it is on the bulkier side, so it can be difficult to shuffle and work with. The backs are truly uninspiring and make the deck look kind of cheap when it's laid face down. The inconsistencies between the book and the deck were a bit disappointing. So while the book and deck can certainly be used together, I found it much more useful and enjoyable to work with them separately. I really did enjoy Fontana's approach to the tarot, and it offered some original insight and interesting ways to approach readings. However, I personally found that this approach worked a little bit better for me with a more realistic style deck. The deck itself has become one of my favorites for lighter readings. I love the dreamy storybook quality that shines through the beautiful artwork. I get very clear and balanced readings with this deck and have used it on numerous occasions. If you enjoy working with a pip style deck that has a beautifully soft and welcoming imagery, then this might be the deck for you. If you're interested in approaching tarot from a more psychological and meditative standpoint, this might be the book for you. I was interested in both, which is why I purchased this deck. It just turns out I like working with them separately. So thank you for taking this journey with me through the Wisdom Seekers Tarot. I hope that you enjoyed exploring this deck and will join me again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.